In the study of India's past, the history of Bengaluru is criminally underrepresented. The fourth largest city in the country, the birthplace of the modern startup and software culture, is often thought of as a city with only a very recent history, a non-entity before the IT boom of the 1990s. Which will sound insane to you by the end of this video because most people have no idea how important Bangalore was to the history of the Deccan and South India even before the British arrived. This is a city older than Chennai or Mumbai or Kolkata, a city that was built by Kannada kings but defended by Maratha chieftains, a city that was coveted by the Mughals and beloved by the kings of Mysore, a city that was the battleground of numerous wars from its very inception right up to when the British knocked down its gates and took complete control. This is the history of Bangalore as you've never seen it, as a proud medieval fortress city long before its transformation into the silicon-fueled metropolis that it is today. Even in the 16th century, the name Bengaluru was far from new. An ancient inscription found in Begur offers evidence to the fact that a place called Bengaluru, wherever that may have been, is over 1,000 years old. In fact, Roman coins found in Yashwantpur points to the possibility that settlements in the Bangalore area have existed for over 2,000 years and was an important trading center. So when Kempegowda I decided to build his new capital in 1537, he wasn't just choosing some random spot he liked. It's believed that in typical Gowda custom, he set 4 oxen tied to plows in the 4 cardinal directions, which were driven all the way up to the marked limits. These milk-white oxen, beautifully decorated with vermilion and bright orange and yellow marigold flowers, would have pulled the plows on a cool Bangalore morning, furrowing the soil with their plows. These paths, literally carved into the earth, became the Chickpete and Dodpete roads, the 2 central roads of the original Bengaluru. Today, these medieval-era streets are some of the busiest centers of commercial activity in the city. Kempegowda planned the streets and blocks with great purpose, assigning each area a different name based on what was meant to be sold there. Aralepete was for cotton sellers, Kumbarpete was for potters, Balepete was for bangle makers, and so on. But it's impossible to chart the destiny of this newborn city without a brief character study of its charismatic, ambitious, and ever-loyal founder. Kempegowda I ruled for a remarkable 46 years, almost a lifetime in those days, on the throne of the Yelahanka Nadu Prabhus. He was a loyal servant of the great Vijayanagara Empire, which by the time of his reign was slowly coming apart at the seams. Dissent rippled through the ranks of the Vijayanagara vassal rulers, who all sought to win their independence from the fracturing empire. It was in this simmering political atmosphere that Kempegowda established his loyalty to the Emperor Achyutaraya by defeating seditious kings and bringing their lands back under Vijayanagara control. This was also around the time when he built his shiny new capital of Bengaluru. He was a strong and well-respected king, but as he grew in power, Kempegowda's ambition got the better of him. He got rather cocky and was making lots of enemies in the Vijayanagara capital. The final straw was when he established his own coin mint. Seeing this as an act of defiance, the emperor summoned him to Hampi, where he promptly confiscated his lands and imprisoned him. But as Kempegowda languished in jail, the empire outside was slowly sinking deeper into anarchy. More and more vassal kings were breaking away from the once sprawling empire, even as the Bijapur and Golconda sultanates were circling, sniping at the empire's heels like hungry hyenas. Realizing he was losing his grip on his territories, the emperor had no choice but to free one of the few vassal kings he could be sure was still loyal to him. After 5 long years in prison, Kempegowda made his proud return back to his beloved capital. And despite the ignominy of his imprisonment, Kempegowda remained a fiercely loyal servant of the empire. Along with fighting for Vijayanagara, he spent much of his time and money improving and beautifying Bengaluru. He built iconic structures like the Gavi Gangadhareshwara cave temple at Gavipura and the famous Basava temple that gave its name to modern-day Basavangudi. He built tanks to supply water to the city and agraharas to support the local Brahmins and irrigation networks to help the farmers. According to later accounts by the Marathas, the city was full of deep ditches of water drawn from the big tanks that surround the fort walls. Within the town are fine buildings, the most prominent among which is the palace, atop which wave flags of different colors. On the walls of some of the houses are found beautiful paintings. There are many commercial streets in this town with an array of shops displaying costly goods. Fountains have been built in many of the town squares. There are plenty of peacocks and pigeons here, and the temples of this place are lofty and finely built with intricate images carved on the temple pillars. I like to imagine what Bengaluru would have looked like in those days. The misty morning silence would have been broken only by the call of peacocks and koels, slowly giving way to the bustle and noise of the market streets coming alive for the day. Interestingly, the 4 famous watchtowers of Kempegowda weren't built by him, but by his grandson, Kempegowda II or Immadi Kempegowda. By the time Kempegowda's son, Giddegowda, came to the throne, the kingdom had fallen even deeper into turmoil. Despite the emperor's best efforts, the Vijayanagara lands were slowly falling apart, like a giant being eaten alive from the inside out. At this point, the traitorous vassals of the empire were in open revolt, seeking the help of the Deccan Sultanates to destroy the empire once and for all. The final blow was the Battle of Talikota in 1565, which sounded the death knell for the once great Vijayanagara Empire. The 4 Muslim sultanates of the Deccan, Bijapur, Golconda, Bidar and Ahmednagar, had brought the mighty empire to its knees. In the wake of this crushing defeat, the political landscape of India all the way from Tamil Nadu to Maharashtra was forever changed. Now it was only a matter of time before the Sultanates turned their attention to the remaining holdouts in the Deccan. The Sultanates slowly fed on the remains of the old empire, taking pieces of the vast lands for themselves. The Bijapur army was marching through the Mysore plateau, the hill forts in the region standing no chance against their platoons of war elephants, their deadly ranks of cavalry, and the barrage of cannon fire that rained down on them. It must have been an intimidating sight, a moving miniature city of decorated men and animals carrying everything from their stocks of food for the army to the harems of women to keep the officers in high spirits. Eventually, they marched right up to the gates of Bangalore, a much larger military force than the city had ever seen before. It took 3 days of fighting, but eventually, Kempegowda's proud capital fell to the invaders. 100 years after his grandfather had built the city from nothing, Immadi Kempegowda was forced to surrender Bangalore to Bijapur, paid a hefty ransom and retreated to Magadi, which he and his descendants would rule as their new capital. There's an interesting historical touchpoint that we don't often hear about. Despite their brutality, the Deccan Sultanates could be shrewd and fair rulers. Instead of humiliating or outright killing the rulers they defeated, they'd often let them retain some of their lands and power in order to earn their loyalty. After all, it's not easy to replace a king who already has established political influence and administrative experience. So, making them your vassal ruler was a smart way to expand your territories. Although Immadi lost Bengaluru and his most valuable lands to Bijapur, he got to keep other smaller regions and, perhaps more importantly, his dignity. But Bijapur couldn't have taken Bangalore without the help of one intelligent, enterprising warrior who had served the Sultanate and led their armies to several victories on the battlefield. Given his contributions to the success of Bijapur's conquests in the south, they felt it was only right to reward him with a cut of the prize. And that is how the next ruler of Bengaluru came to be not a Kannada king, but a Maratha chieftain. Shaji Bhosle was immediately taken by the cool climate and undulating landscape of Bengaluru and its surroundings. After the Bijapur Sultan gifted the city to him as a personal jagir or estate, he set up his own court there. A patron of the arts, he turned Bengaluru into a center of learning, inviting poets and scholars to his city. On any given day in Shahji's court, you could expect to see a scholar from some far-off land, surrounded by courtiers challenging him to a battle of wits, giving him riddles or asking him to compose verses on the spot. It was in this environment that he raised his 2 young sons, Venkoji and his older half-brother, Shivaji. Yes, that Shivaji. The 2 boys spent their days among the forests around Bengaluru, listening to the sound of mynas in the trees and kingfishers by the lakes, developing a deep fondness for the land even as they prepared themselves for a future that would take them in wildly different directions. When he turned 12, Shivaji went back to Pune, leaving Bangalore in the hands of his younger brother. It was at this time that the Bijapur Sultanate tasked Venkoji with marching his army south to conquer Tanjavur. The famed riches of the Tamil city must have captivated the Maratha chieftain because soon after taking the city, he decided to shift his capital there. But Venkoji wasn't exactly what you'd call a motivated ruler. From his new capital, he was finding it difficult to manage affairs in Bengaluru, and he didn't seem particularly interested in installing a governor to look after the city. His solution? Sell Bangalore to the highest bidder and be rid of the problem altogether. Just one problem. When Shivaji heard about this, he was furious. The city was a jagir, a personal estate of the Marathas given to his father to safeguard. They had spent their youth in this city, riding together and hunting among the hills around Bangalore. At the very least, he should get his rightful part of the land before his brother foolishly auctioned it off. He had to ride south to speak with Venkoji before he gave away such a precious piece of their childhood. It was fortuitous then that the Golconda Sultan had ambitions in the Karnataka and Tamil Nadu regions. It gave Shivaji an excuse to lead his army into the Deccan heartland, conquering cities all the way from Vellore to almost as far south as the Kaveri River. After many attempts, Shivaji finally managed to convince his younger brother to meet him for negotiations. The two brothers met on a warm, breezy afternoon on the banks of the Kaveri, herons gliding low over the water as it flowed calmly past. Shivaji and Venkoji would have embraced, surrounded by Shivaji's massive army encampment. The discussions wore on for the next day or two, but it was soon apparent that neither brother could agree on favorable terms to split their father's jagir. Shivaji made it clear that he wasn't going to let Venkoji leave without coming to an agreement, which only made things worse. Left with no choice, Venkoji waited for the cover of darkness one night, managing to procure a small boat, and after he slipped past Shivaji's guards, made a daring escape across the Kaveri. The brothers declared war on each other, their armies clashing just days later. Venkoji put up a strong fight, but it was ultimately his older, more capable brother who took the victory. Despite the hostilities, this was still his younger brother, so Shivaji decided to show him mercy. He bestowed Bengaluru and its surrounding areas to Venkoji's wife, Deepa Bai, giving Venkoji the responsibility of managing the affairs of the city. This was a task he carried out admirably. I might have given you the wrong impression, but Venkoji was far from an incapable ruler. He did a great job looking after Bangalore, overseeing the construction and repairs of canals, tanks, and other public works. He even funded the construction of the famous Kadu Malleshwara temple, which was once in a dense forest and eventually gave its name to one of Bangalore's oldest neighborhoods, Malleshwara. But by now, the Deccan was turning into a hotly contested battleground where the armies of the Marathas, the Bijapur and Golconda Sultanates were clashing with local kings and rulers, even as the looming shadow of the Mughal Empire was advancing farther and farther south. Having conquered most of north and central India, the Mughals under Aurangzeb were bringing their superior military might down on the people of Maharashtra, Andhra and Karnataka. It wasn't long before Bijapur, one of the two greatest powers in the Deccan at the time, fell to Aurangzeb's sword, and Golconda was next in line. Seeing the writing on the wall, Venkoji hastily tried to renew negotiations to sell Bengaluru to the king of Mysore, Chikkadevaraja Wodeyar, now that his elder brother was no more. There was soon to be good news and bad news for the Maratha chief. The good news was that when the Mughals finally came knocking at the gates of Bengaluru, Venkoji had retreated back to Tanjavur and was safe and sound in his old capital. The bad news? After all those years of negotiations, he had exactly nothing to show for it when the Mughals took away his city by force. There was a brief period here when Bangalore was suddenly a city of many languages. Mughal officers and soldiers from the north and west spoke Pushtu, Punjabi, Rajasthani, Gujarati, Mughalai and Persian languages. The city was garrisoned by Mughal platoons, becoming a useful military outpost thanks to the fort built by Kempegowda. Today, the only relic of the Mughals' short stay in Bangalore exists in the form of the Sangeen Jamia Masjid in Nagaratpete, perhaps the oldest mosque in the city. But just 3 years later, the Mughals would finish what Venkoji Bhosle had started over a decade earlier. They sold Bengaluru to Chikkadevaraja Wodeyar for 3 lakh rupees. Chikkadevaraja was one of the most interesting characters you'll get to meet in the history of Karnataka. Aside from being a great builder of temples, canals and forts, he was a brilliant politician and military strategist. While the rest of the Deccan was slowly being backed into a corner by the predatory Aurangzeb, Chikkadevaraja Wodeyar had cleverly forged an alliance with him, allowing him to expand his territories with Mughal assistance. The purchase of Bangalore was the start of this long-standing relationship, which would continue to benefit him until the end of his life. He didn't ignore Bangalore either. Under his watch, structures like the Venkatramana Swami temple on KR Road and a second fort just south of the main one were added to the city. He wouldn't know it yet, but that fort would end up being an important stronghold in a war fought between Mysore and a mysterious foreign power that had only just arrived in India. Over the next 6 decades, Bengaluru remained an important source of commerce and revenue for Mysore, which by now was struggling to fight back against the Nawab of Arcot and the expanding Maratha Empire. That is, until a new political upheaval rocked the kingdom of Mysore, completely shifting the power dynamics between the Wodeyar dynasty and an unlikely newcomer to the throne. In 1759, when Bengaluru was under heavy siege by the Maratha forces, a commander of the Mysore armies bravely rode in to save the day, driving the enemy back and recapturing the city for his king. Just a decade earlier, this man had been a nobody, an illiterate warrior with no noble blood. And yet, here he was, striding proudly into the Mysore palace to be awarded the exalted position of Nawab of Mysore by the King Krishnaraja Wodeyar II himself. But this man was Hyder Ali, and he had far grander ambitions because just 2 years later, he'd overthrow the Prime Minister of Mysore and imprison the young king in his own palace. With a hand as capable of wielding a sword as it was at controlling the army, he placed himself on the throne of Mysore with no one to challenge him. And so began a new era of the Mysore kingdom, marked by countless wars fought against old enemies and, as we'll soon see, a threat that no one in the country saw coming. Hyder Ali may not have been a man of letters, but he was a wickedly sharp military strategist. Having been impressed by the battle tactics and training methods of French soldiers stationed in Pondicherry, Hyder Ali sought the help of French soldiers to train his own troops in the methods of European warfare. He recognized that a small, highly disciplined force of well-trained soldiers could easily overpower a large, disorganized horde of fighters. A fact which he put to good use when he began a campaign of expanding the Mysore territories deeper into Tamil Nadu, Andhra and Karnataka. But Hyder Ali was encroaching on lands that had already been claimed by a foreign power, the British East India Company. After he tried and failed to strike an alliance with the British, he realized he had no choice but to go to war. And so began the First Anglo-Mysore War, a conflict that also ended up dragging in the Nizam of Hyderabad and the Marathas. It was here that Bangalore proved beyond vital in the war effort. With its 2 forts, the city was the ideal military outpost. Hyder Ali established a foundry to manufacture cannons, artillery and weapons, as well as storage for grain and gunpowder. Long before multi-million-dollar tech giants built their R&D facilities in Bangalore, Hyder Ali and his son Tipu Sultan built a sort of laboratory where they innovated on artillery technology. This is where they developed the famous and much dreaded Mysorean rockets. These consisted of an iron tube filled with gunpowder, sharp blades on either side, with the whole thing mounted on a 4-foot bamboo pole. Unlike the rockets used by the Europeans and the Mughals, the iron shells gave them an incredible range of nearly 2 kilometers and a deadly destructive power. The Mysorean rockets sowed chaos among the ranks of the British, slicing up soldiers, breaking apart tight formations and allowing the Mysoreans to rout their armies. The British would later even study this rocket technology to build their own versions, which they'd go on to use against Napoleon and the United States. Hyder Ali eventually won the First Anglo-Mysore War, almost managing to take Madras in the process. This, however, was only the beginning of Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan's troubles with the British menace. But between all these battles and bloodshed, the two of them still had a kingdom to run. Mysore reached the peak of its economic power under Tipu Sultan, becoming the richest kingdom in India for a period. Aside from the highly productive agriculture, textile became a major source of revenue for the state. It's believed that Tipu Sultan introduced the silkworm to Mysore, kickstarting the Mysore silk industry that's thriving to this day. He even connected many of the cities in his kingdom via well-constructed roads. But something very interesting happened during Hyder's campaigns of the Anglo-Mysore Wars when he was traveling through Tamil Nadu. He noticed that certain communities of farmers had taken a keen interest in gardening. not just planting crops, but growing aesthetic orchards and gardens, tending to flowers and nurturing exotic plants. Hyder was no stranger to the finer things in life, and he asked this community of farmers to settle down in his kingdom in exchange for handsome pay and special amenities. These men and women took him up on the offer, settling in Bangalore and getting to work in the fertile soil around the city. These people came to be known as the Tigala community, a Kannada contortion of the word Tamila. Their proclivity for gardening, combined with the fine weather of the city and Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan's aesthetic sensibilities, gave rise to one of the most iconic landmarks in all of Karnataka, the stunning Lal Bagh Botanical Gardens. Although Hyder Ali had commissioned it in 1760, even before the First Anglo-Mysore War, it was his son Tipu who completed it with the help of the Tigalas. Created in the style of Mughal gardens, Lal Bagh was a labor of love. 240 acres of exotic plants from all over the world. Today, Lal Bagh is still one of the city's greatest landmarks, attracting hundreds of thousands of people every year to see its colorful flower shows, attend events, or just go for their morning walks. And if you go to the top of the large granite hill in the eastern part of the garden, you will find one of the 4 famous watchtowers built by Kempegowda II. As for the Tigala people, they are one of the most colorful communities in Karnataka, and they celebrate Karaga, a 9-day folk festival of flowers and dance and acrobatics to remember the story of the bravery of Draupadi in the Mahabharata. The Karaga festival in Bengaluru is particularly spectacular, a massive procession involving a giant crown of flowers, hundreds of beating drums, and elaborate performances. But now we're back with Hyder Ali, and Mysore was squarely in the crosshairs of the British, who wanted to drive out the French to become the sole European power operating in India. Hyder Ali, who was receiving arms and ammunition from the French, opened hostilities against the British once more, starting the Second Anglo-Mysore War. Hyder Ali died just 2 years later, leaving the kingdom in the hands of his son. But by now, British power was rising in South India under the eye of Warren Hastings, and Tipu Sultan was being pressured on all sides. The Third Anglo-Mysore War was the beginning of the end for the Mysore Sultanate, and Bengaluru found itself yet again at the center of another great battle. If the British could get their hands on the city, they would gain an enormously valuable military stronghold in Karnataka, making them unstoppable. The year 1791 would spell great darkness and despair for the Mysore kingdom, because in February of that year, the British army had marched right up to the gates of Bengaluru. As they laid siege to the city, the old fort walls were battered mercilessly by cannon fire, shattering the morning silence and choking the air with smoke and dust. Lord Cornwallis kept up a relentless assault, fighting off Tipu's armies even as he kept up the pressure on Bangalore's fort walls, trying to find any opening in the fortifications. Finally, on 21st March, a group of engineers in the British army managed to sneak up to the fort, planting explosive charges in the walls and successfully breaching the ramparts. After 6 whole weeks of fighting, Bangalore was finally in the hands of the British. What followed was the swift and humiliating downfall of the Mysore powers, with Tipu Sultan's ultimate death in 1799. Looking back, it's hard to imagine that a foreign power, and a trading company no less, had managed to play the powerful and wealthy kings and nizams against each other, exploiting their desires for selfish personal gain to such great effect, and gradually dismantling any and all opposition that stood in their way through a combination of ingenious political maneuvering and deadly military force. With no one to contest them, the East India Company appointed the Wodeyars as the rulers of Mysore once more, only this time in a subordinate capacity to the British. By now, Bangalore had acquired a reputation for its uncharacteristically cool climate, something that the British, particularly the ones stationed in Madras, were eager to take advantage of. They moved their garrisons from Srirangpatna to Bangalore, constructing roads, housing for troops, churches and shops, all catering to a purely colonial population. Because let's not forget, this was a completely separate unit of Bangalore, far removed from the old Pete area, which was occupied by Indians. Bangalore cantonment was an idealized slice of Britain, its weather pleasant, its bungalows spacious with ample gardens, and offering all the trendy haunts of an increasingly prosperous generation of Englishmen and women. Ballroom dances enlivened the nights in the wake of orchestra filling the air. At the nightclubs, jovial men excelled in glacial wit, while vivacious beauties baited attention with swaying charms. At times, however, night entertainment was highly spiced when Bangalore's bohemia preferred after-theatre hours restaurants where they could sup at ease and drink rum, gin, sherry and all that. Brigade Road at that time contained many bars, taverns and public houses, Adelphi Shades, Elysium, New Inn, etc., where attractive women waited at the tables for chance company. Bangalore cantonment became a military playground of sorts where everyone from pensioners to soldiers could enjoy the slow life, with the added benefit of cheap labour being provided by the locals living just next door. The Pete area was also growing rapidly. The money flowing in from the British attracted all manner of merchant, artisan and labourer to seek opportunities in the newly expanding city. Some of Bangalore's oldest roads, Artillery Road, Brigade Road, Infantry Road, all get their military sounding names from the constant presence of British troops in the area. Between 1831 and 1881, the Kingdom of Mysore was taken over by the Mysore Commission, which existed to impose a more English way of doing things. This saw the British take over Tipu Sultan's extravagant summer palace in Bangalore, setting up government offices and residences there. You might recognize these names: Sir Mark Cubbon and Lewin Bentham Bowring. These were two of the most prominent chief commissioners of the Mysore Commission, responsible for sweeping reforms in the administrations of the state, like prompt disbursal of salaries, bringing order to a chaotic bureaucracy, instituting pensions for aging government workers, and reorganizing the Bangalore Police Department. When Bowring came into office, he saw that Tipu Sultan's palace was in a state of disrepair and unsafe to house the state's treasury, and so he commissioned the Public Offices Building in 1866, where the government would be situated and would remain there for over 90 years until it moved to its final location, the Vidhan Saudha. Today, that building houses the Karnataka High Court, the iconic bright red building in the neoclassical style, evoking the elegant imperiousness of the Roman and Greek architecture that Europeans were so fascinated by. Eventually, Cubbon and Bowring would go on to be immortalized in the famous Cubbon Park and the Bowring Institute. Bangalore before independence was not without its fair share of drama. Between 1896 and 1899, the city was struck by a deadly wave of the bubonic plague, forcing the British to mass inoculate people and set up clinics and hospitals. Roads were widened, drainages were improved, and sanitation facilities were implemented across the city. During World War I, Bangalore continued its long-standing tradition of being a weapons manufacturing powerhouse, because this was where the famous Bangalore torpedo was invented in 1912. Taking inspiration from the Mysorean rockets used by Tipu Sultan, they were these long pipes stuffed with explosives on one end, and you had to push it forward and detonate it to clear barbed wire or any other obstructions. In fact, this torpedo was used and improved upon by the Americans in World War II, where it played a crucial role in the D-Day landings in Normandy. The Bangalore torpedo has continued to be used to this day in some form by American, Australian, British, Filipino and Israeli armed forces as a simple but effective way of clearing the battlefield for advancing troops. Much later, when Britain was freely using India as its breadbasket during World War II, Bangalore faced an acute shortage of rice, a staple food for South Indians. A Bangalorean restaurateur, Yagna Narayana Maya, experimented with various ingredients until he hit upon the perfect recipe that required no rice, the semolina-based Rava Idli. That same recipe would go on to be a cornerstone of the success of his MTR restaurants and is a favorite breakfast dish in Karnataka today. Once India gained its independence, the princely state of Mysore became part of the new republic. But pretty soon, it became clear that the seat of the current government, the old Public Offices Building, was not large enough to accommodate the growing offices of the state. The plan initially was to create a modest American-style administrative building opposite the High Court, but Kengal Hanumantaya, who was elected as the chief minister in 1952, had other plans. In his mind, the seat of the government must be a structure that represents the will of the people of that land. Power of rule now vests with the people, and therefore the design of the House of Legislature should be such as to convey this idea of power and dignity. The style being Indian, particularly of Mysore, and not purely Western. In designing the new offices of the state, Hanumantaya drew from the infinitely deep well of architectural inspirations from across the Chola, Hoysala and Vijayanagara empires. He mingled the intricate stylings of ancient Indian stonework with the sweeping, imposing grandeur of modern 20th century megastructures to compose a design that had never been seen before and hasn't been replicated since. Bringing in hundreds of tons of material from the nearby Magadi and Turvekere, he sculpted the future of Bengaluru in the white granite of Karnataka. The structure took 4 years and the labor of 5,000 convicts and 1,500 artisans to complete, and sparked numerous controversies owing to its steep price of 1.8 crore rupees, a colossal sum at that time. Hanumantaya inaugurated the Vidhan Saudha on 10th October 1956, a neo-Dravidian marvel of Kannada architecture. From here on out, the government of the newly formed state of Karnataka would sit here and oversee the progress of Bengaluru as it went from the Garden City to the Silicon Valley of India, the fastest growing metropolis in the country and home to over 13 million people, each with their own dreams of making it big in the city of endless opportunity. Thank you so much for watching this video on the history of Bengaluru. There's a million little things in this city's history that I couldn't possibly cover here, so feel free to drop a comment if you've got some fun facts. If you haven't already, like and subscribe and let me know which city's history I should cover next. See you soon!